covered the stories of the RCMP uh, having their concerns about the border, having concerns about now Trump being elected, that there might be migration heading towards Canada. They're concerned about national security. I thought it'd bring attention to this concerning issue on national security that seems to be kind of whitewashed, never really discussed. But here's this, for example. This is from the Vancouver Sun that says human smugglers, meaning human trafficking, used freight trains to move people across the border from BC to the United States, or from BC, the US says. In one case last August, 29 people were rescued from a freight car filled with plastic pellets. So it goes on to say the U.S. Department of Justice, two men are facing smuggling charges in Seattle for their alleged role in what was calls a dangerous scheme to transport people out of BC and across the border on freight trains. U.S. Attorney of the Western District of Washington, Tessa Gorman, says 45-year-old Jose, um, or so not, Jesus Ortiz Plata of Oregon and 35-year-old Juan Pablo Celia Medina of Washington were arrested last week with three non-citizens who were allegedly smuggled out of Canada. Gorman says Ortiz Plata and Medina employed extremely dangerous smuggling scheme, and that is one case last August, 29 people were rescued from a freight car filled with plastic pellets. An affidavit by a U.S. Homeland Security officer says 28 were Mexican nationals and one was a Colombian guiding the group, whose presence was noticed around 1 a.m. when border officers saw anomalies in an x ray of the car. Court documents outlining the charges filed in Seattle on Friday says Ortega and Medina came to the attention of investigators last July after Border Patrol agents identified a phone number associated with numerous smuggling events through Blaine, Washington, dated back to September 22. The Homeland Security investigators' affidavit says Ortiz Plata and Medina were arrested on May 23rd after being tracked by law enforcement agents to an apartment complex in Everett, where they believed the pair picked up non citizens seeking unlawful entry into the United States. After being detained, agents questioned the three unnamed men who were found traveling with Ortiz Plata and Medina, the affidavit says. Two of the men were interviewed by border agents in Spanish, revealing they were brothers originally from Honduras who had flown into Vancouver 3 days before their arrest to be smuggled over the border designated for Portland, Oregon. One of the brothers told the agents had originally gone to the U.S. illegally, but had been working in Calgary for several months. The agent's affidavit said, that gave slightly different accounts of how they came to be smuggled over the border. One said they flown into Vancouver, while the other told border agents that they were taking a bus and paid $2,000 each to the alleged smugglers. The men told agents that they arrived in Vancouver 5 days before he was arrested on the U.S. side of the border and was driven to the border and told to walk across and meet waiting vehicle, the affidavit says. Department of Justice officials in Washington lead the pair also linked to the August 2023 discovery of 29 people in a freight car at the rail facility in Blaine, just across the border from BC. Being locked in a freight train car is dangerous. There is no control over heat, cold, or ventilation, and people can be injured or killed by shifting freight, Gorman said in the news release. Ortiz Plata and Medina face up to 10 years in prison and a fine of 250,000 US dollars. So I bring this to attention now that we're having these national security conversations as we're looking into the case of Lauren Chen, the opposed, Russian disinformation collaborated with a bunch of other podcasters, took money from a supposed Russian businessman to demise the Western culture by presenting, Eastern propaganda. Why isn't this brought to national attention? Why isn't this brought to national attention? If we're going to actually have a discussion about national security and the border, which we should be having, which is why Donald Trump, one of his key promises, one of his campaign ordeals, one of the reasons why people came in a lot of swing states in the South came towards him is because of his acclamation about the border. We don't seem to have that. We don't seem to have that. And if we're going to actually have a serious conversation about national security, let it be known that in a lot of these provinces, we're fortunate enough that here in Ontario, we have rivers that kind of block the entry points. Like you have to go over the bridge. If you're in Windsor, Detroit, you go over the Ambassador Bridge. If you're, Niagara Falls or Buffalo, you go over those bridges. But a lot of these provinces, and I've seen this before on video, I've seen people do this, is because it's just flat territory, there isn't much security. There isn't a whole lot of security. There's people that go to southern BC, take walks and hikes through the forest in the southern part of that province, and can easily end up in Washington State, can easily cross the border. And we're seeing that on top of seeing now using freight trains, using boats, of human trafficking. That's what this is. This is human trafficking. That they're smuggling people illegally in between countries. There's people that are coming in to this country and smuggling themselves into the United States and back and forth. And none of this gets the attention that it deserves. Like this happened August of 2023, and I'm just knowing this now in November of 2024. Like that's just kind of crazy. That's just kind of mind-blowing that it takes this long to actually find out a story like this. And this has caused a bit of an uproar. This has caused obviously a lot of controversy with many Canadians, including the fact that this came out. And there has been a spike in social media presence about how they're using cargo ships to smuggle in people, particularly children. Now, I don't know the veracity of this story, but for someone like this guy, Real Raw News points out, dock workers aren't threatening to strike only because they're underpaid. That's though certainly true, but they're also furious and want to know why they hear screaming children inside shipping containers. So the ongoing port strikes that are happening in Montreal and in BC, the Port of Vancouver, the Port of BC, obviously, yes, they're striking because they're underpaid, because of lack of benefits, because the higher corporation that controls the presence of our ports are undermining the workers. But there's also this controversy now, seeing the massive influx of human smuggling and trafficking a lot in BC because of these measures. There's also this concern that there might be children inside these shipping containers. So this also leads to this video here of a resident. Says Vancouver resident claims that you can hear people screaming in the shipping containers at the Port of Vancouver. And listen, this is a citizen who was walking by those ports, walking by the shipping containers, the cargo ships. They travel around the world and pick up anything from oil to manufactured goods. And this lady is claiming that she hears screaming of little kids. And here's what she had to say about this. Get everybody out. So that's concerning. That's concerning. And like I said, I don't know the veracity of it. I don't know if it's true or not, but judging from the article you just saw, judging from other instances, let's go this graph here. This is from Stats Canada. This is from Statistics Canada. Even pointed this out. This human trafficking reports jumped in 2019. Solved and unsolved human trafficking cases reported to police in BC. So they have it in a bar graph here. The solved cases are obviously ones that they caught, made arrests, they made, jurisdiction, they went to court and they filed for complaint on human trafficking. But look at how much unsolved cases there are. And this goes back from 2010 to 2022. And if you look at statistics, it's, from 2010 to about 2018, you know, kind of average. There was a bit of a spike there in 2015, but a lot of them have been solved. So a lot of them have been called into police. There have been arrests, so on and so forth. Look at the start of 2019 into 2020 and 2021. If you notice there, 2021 being the highest of unsolved human trafficking cases in British Columbia. Now, what was happening in 2021 in Canada? Well, if you may recall, a lot of businesses were told by the federal government that they had to shut down. That your mom and pop store, your local salon, the people that run their small independent shops were forced to shut down. And you had to be locked away. You had to be mandated to take, an experimental vaccine, which very safe and effective. Give it that. According to YouTube Science. But as we're being told that you can't board a train or a plane or a bus or go anywhere out in public unless you are mandated and cooperate with the government exploitation along with big pharmaceuticals, they brought in illegal immigrants at a massive wave to take over positions who they claim were not being filled. Who were not being filled by Canadians that they just told you had to stay home. So, isn't it just interesting that in 2021, 2022, and even now in 2024, a lot of these cases continue to be unresolved or tracked down or monitored or police even investigating this, because it seems like there's some sort of initiative of the federal government knowing about this and keeping it quiet. Because why else would they not mention this in national security terms? Why would they not bring this to attention? If you're going to have a conversation about national security here in Canada, why would they not be concerned about one of the biggest provinces in the west of Canada having human trafficking cases being unsolved? So here's some more stories just on how human trafficking is causing chaos here in Canada, that they're pretty much underreporting this. You don't see a lot of these stories. You don't see a lot of conversation being brought to the House of Commons and Parliament and so on. But here's just some examples here. This is from January of 2024. Human trafficking cases are increasing, but charges are rarely laid in BC. Advocates say a national approach for the policing of human trafficking is needed. Here's this one. Navy SEALs raid a cargo ship full of smuggled children. So that kind of goes back to what that resident was saying, that she heard screams of young kids. Here's from the CBC. Human trafficking is one of the fastest growing crimes in Canada, and anyone could be a target. That's from 2023, November 9th. Here's Global News. Another man sentenced in 3-year-old Vancouver human trafficking case. And that's from January of 2024. 3-year-old case. They finally sentenced him. So, like I said, if they really are concerned about national security here in this country, if they really are concerned about this, Why isn't this front and center? Why isn't this the talk of the town? Why is this not being brought up by Pierre Polyev? Why is this being brought up in the House of Commons during question period? That you have human trafficking, exploitation continuously going on in places of BC. And that's not the only province that's dealing with it. That's not the only province. Like I said, if you go across the prairies, if you go across to these flatland areas, it's really hard to protect the border with such measures because of the lack of infrastructure, because of the lack of resources, because of the fact that we have exploitation to bring as many of these criminals in, as many of these people just pouring into the nation, pouring into a lot of the metropolitan areas. That's why you're just seeing an influx of people in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal and coming out of nowhere. And people within Justin Trudeau's cabinet continuously lied to you, saying that we have to bring in these people. We have to bring them in because there's such a population decline. But really, the measure is the fact that they want to exploit these people and kick out Canadians to exploit the incomers and make them put them into the job market so that they don't have to pay livable wages, so they don't have to worry about providing benefits, treating them like employees. And this is a huge growing national problem that's just being underreported, under stated in places like Parliament. This should be brought to attention. This should absolutely be brought to attention.